Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Hope in the Time of Corona, and indeed to another part of our Judges sermon series. We are almost through the whole book of Judges. This is the penultimate Judges sermon, and we are into it's a bit of an odd one. There are 5 chapters left. We're going to cover 5 chapters in 2 weeks. Samson, who we finished with last week, was the last of the judges. So there are no more judges. We've finished the chronological events. We've finished the judges, but there are still these 5 chapters left. And what it is it's Tim Keller, who we've kind of been following loosely along with his book. He calls it a double appendix. So he says at the end there are these 2 extra stories, and really they're there to show us what life was like in the time of the judges. And so throughout the whole of the book of Judges, we've heard this refrain over and over again: the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. And really there are no details given to that. That's kind of a top level view. The people did evil in the sight of the Lord. In the sight of the Lord. Today we get kind of on the ground an appendix, which is a story about what that actually means or what that looks like. And then we'll get the same again last week, in the next week, which is the last week, as we bring this to its conclusion. So that's what we're doing. We're going to put flesh on those bones of what it means to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And just heads up for what I'd like to do today. So firstly, I want to tell you one of these stories. We're looking at chapters 17 and 18 today. I'm actually only going to really look at the first 6 verses of chapter 17. The whole thing is the story of a chap called Micah, but we'll look at that. And then from there, I want to think about how Micah and his example is mirrored or mimicked in our society, what we can learn from that. And to do so, I want to give 2 examples from kind of modern culture. Plus a bonus example at the end. So that's what's coming your way. But as I say, we start by having a look at the story as has become the tradition and the custom. I'm not going to read even just these 6 little verses out for you, but I am going to tell you what happens in the story. So we dive into the story with Micah, and he's there with his mum, and it's an odd beginning because it starts with him saying, "Hey mum, do you remember those 1,100 pieces of silver that got stolen? That were yours?" Well, do you remember that you put a curse on whoever it is who stole them? Yeah. Well, it was me. I stole them, so I kind of want to give them back because I don't want to be cursed. It's an odd place to start a story, but it gets stranger because he admits that he's stolen this 1,100 pieces of silver. His mum's like, "God bless you, son. God bless you." And then she says, "I'm gonna use them to build a statue of God, so that God literally can bless you, and he can go in your home and you can have your own little shrine and you can be blessed at home." And so Micah gets this. Well, first of all, Micah's mum takes 200 of the 1,100, which she said she was going to give to make a statue, and just takes these 200 and she makes a statue. She gives it to Micah, and he's got a little statue in his home. He adds to it an ephod, which is another piece of priestly paraphernalia from that time. And also, he builds out this little shrine, and then to complete the set, he ordains one of his sons. I love it. He's like, you're ordained. And so he ordains one of his sons so that he's got a shrine and he's got his own little priest. So he's got everything. When I was reading this, I was thinking, is this like the Judges' time equivalent of Zoom? You know, he's got everything direct into his home, so he never has to leave his home, and he can worship or go to church in his pajamas. Maybe that's what he was aiming for. Anyway, the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. Or here we see Micah doing evil in the sight of the Lord. At first, it might seem like actually he's not doing that much evil. It might seem like he's a good guy, right? He's very religious. He's upstanding. But this story is a cautionary tale, and it is one which, for those who are reading it, they'd perhaps recognise the cues quicker than we do, and that is because they're speaking. This is occurring just a few generations after Joshua led the Israelites out of the desert into the Promised Land, which is just a few generations after Moses and the 10 Commandments. This is basic monotheistic morality 101, the 10 Commandments. We have them on the wall at St. Mary Mag's if you can remember that place. And and that was the kind of the moral code for society. So they're still ringing in the ears, and in this story we see Micah and his mum just transgressing a whole bunch of them. The sign is not, hey look, they're good and religious. The sign is, look, they're even breaking our most basic laws. The 10 Commandments are being broken. So in case you can't remember them, here they are. 10 Commandments. Number 1, no God besides me. When Micah makes his shrine, he puts the little statue of God there, and also adds all of his other household gods, it says in the text. He just puts them all there for good measure, you know. Number 2, you are not supposed to have any carved images of God. Clearly Micah made one of those. Number 3, do not take the Lord's name in vain. Maybe they get a pass on this one, but between them, there's some questionable kind of cursing or blessing in the name of the Lord. We'll give them a pass if they need it. 4th one, look after the Sabbath, observe the Sabbath. I don't think this is happening on a Saturday. Don't know. I think they're good on that one. Number 5, honour your mother and father. I don't think stealing 1,100 pieces of silver from your mother is a good way of doing that, so not that one. The next one's the big 2, murdering and adultery. Murdering and adultery. He's good to go on those ones, apparently. Number 8, stealing. Definitely does some stealing in this one. Number 9, bears false witness. Depending on how you're going to want to read that, or, you know, if it's about a testimony in court, he's scot-free. If it's more generally about lying, deceiving, holding up false truths, then, yeah, questionably he's not in with that one. And finally, covet your neighbour's stuff. I mean, it's not his neighbour, it's his mum, but he was apparently coveting those 1,100 silver. So in this tiny, tiny snapshot, we get these 4 very sure breakages of the 10 Commandments. 3 which are questionable, and 3 which probably gets a pass on for today. Throw in the fact that his mother kind of does some cursing and witchcraft right at the beginning of the story. The point is that we are not talking about upstanding citizens of ancient Israel. We are not talking about people who are following God very well. And yet, the thrust of the whole story seems to be towards building a shrine and worshipping God. So, what is going on? Well, this story gets its own little epilogue within the appendix, which is in verse 6, and it says this: there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This little epilogue kind of sums up what's going on in the story and how they got to this place. Everyone is doing right in their own eyes. And more than that, it's a bit of a play on words, and it's twisting what has been the common refrain throughout the whole book. So, as I say, throughout the whole book, we say, there was no king, and the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. Today, that gets twisted and into people did what was right in their own sight. The writer uses this similar language to say, hey, these are similar things, and actually they are the same idea. Similar words, same sentiment, flipped emphasis. No longer are we even thinking about what God thinks about it. We're just thinking about, hey, does this seem right to us? Which I think is the whole point. In fact, walking away from God, or not following God, isn't just about kind of, I don't know, overtly sinning, joining a cult, or like, I don't know, going on a murderous rampage. It's not just about that, nor is it about openly denouncing God or quitting religious activity or even stopping calling on the name of God. They call on the name of God in the story. Walking away from God can be as simple as worshipping God in a way that seems right in our own eyes, rather than seeking to hear God, to know God, to follow God in God's own eyes. We've seen this theme throughout the book of Judges. You know, it comes up. They did evil in the sight of the Lord. What matters? The sight of the Lord is the thing that matters. And here, they've rejected that to the point that they go, well, it's right in our eyes. That's what this story is showing us. And it's showing us that religious life in Israel at the time was religion on Israel's terms. It was a religion of personal preference. It's not about God's truth. It was about their truth. In the Judges for You book, Tim Keller calls it, let me see, I've got the quote here, a religion which seeks to tame and control God. We make God into the God that we want God to be, which, by the way, ends up in us making God in our own image. And another way of saying that is making ourselves God. Tim Keller says, it is an easy religion that they make. It's perhaps an exciting religion that they make, but it is not a religion that will bring us blessing or rescue. So, we can see from the story that Israel have fallen away. Israel are doing evil in the sight of the Lord. They need a deliverer. And it's easy to kind of look back and go, fools. But as I said at the beginning, I think there are some contemporary examples that we can bring also. So we are by no means immune from this kind of human behavior. And so I want to bring two examples. The first one, I hope we can all agree on. I hope it's very simple. We can challenge it. We can be challenged by it. The second one, perhaps a little bit closer to home, but we'll see. And then, as I said, that bonus example at the end. So the first one is the example of white Jesus. So it's a nice contemporary relevant issue. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is the idea that Jesus, for the last 1500 years, has been depicted in European art as a white guy, sometimes with like blonde hair and blue eyes, and he's normally quite feathery as well, I should add, like blowing in the wind or something. Jesus lived in Palestine. He was Palestinian. He did not have white skin. He did not have blue eyes and blonde hair. This is a distortion, and it's totally ridiculous. It's you know, if you're just going down the facts of Jesus as a person, it is absolutely ridiculous, and yet it is massively reproduced in terms of art. There's a picture from the 1940s, I think. Maybe, I can't remember what it's called. Maybe it's called The Face of Jesus. And it has, you've probably seen it because it gets reproduced on like coffee cups and on bookmarks, and sometimes it's hung in a church, and it's this picture of white Jesus, and they think that it is the most reproduced piece of art that has ever been. Like something like 500 million reproductions of this piece of art exist in various forms throughout the world. It is crazy. And to be honest with you, for the longest time, I've seen this as crazy and been like, stop being so crazy. But at the same time, I think I've pushed it aside and gone like, haha, that's funny, they're crazy. But I've written it off as harmless. In its stupidity, frankly, I've gone like, that is so stupid. What harm can that possibly do? Surely everyone can see that that's just stupid. But underestimating it is probably not wisdom. In the same way that when somebody runs for president and on the presidential campaign, they say openly misogynistic things about women, and then they still become the president, we shouldn't underestimate that. And you can't write it off as harmless stupidity, because you'll find out soon it's in power. And I think the last few weeks, as we've spoken and thought about race, that's one of the things that I've been convicted of. I feel really convicted about. This isn't harmless. Even though it's stupid to the max, it's not harmless because it is wielded by people in power. As we wake up to the deep-rooted narratives of white supremacy, we see white Jesus for what he is. He is a rewriting of history to put God on the side of those who have historically had power. To be explicit about it, the idea, brown-skinned Jesus, has not been compatible with the institution that is the church, that has shamefully in its history believed in racial hierarchy, explicitly or otherwise. and I think we're progressing. I think there is huge movement. I think we're on the cusp of a big movement in the UK church. I feel like I get to be part of that. I get to feel convicted, and I get to go along on that journey, and I hope you do too. But essentially, what has happened is Jesus is not a poster boy for any kind of religion or religious system which would say at some level, the lighter your skin, the more godlike you are, or the more naturally selected, or whatever kind of racist. It's terrible. It is terrible. It is awful that this is what our institutions have been involved in, what the church has been implicitly or explicitly involved in. And so when Jesus doesn't fit with what they were involved in, just change him. Just change him. And I think it's for that reason it's a really good example, because we take God and we make him serve our narrative. He just becomes whatever we need him to be for our cause. It's a very good example of that. And it's obviously right now it's a hot topic in our society. And a few weeks ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, he posted on Instagram something about this. He wrote this. He wrote, "Jesus was Middle Eastern, not white. It's important that we remember this." And then he offered this counter narrative by saying, "Here's some of my favorite pieces of artwork which show Jesus kind of more realistically, or not white Jesus, essentially." And he showed these pieces of artwork from around the world. And it's great to see Justin Welby speaking out in this way, using his power in this way. What was not great was to read the comments. I mean, I think that's just wisdom. Never read the comments. I read the comments, and people were venomous, and they said horrific, terrible, racist things. They said, "I can never follow an archbishop who believes that Jesus wasn't white." As I say, we shouldn't underestimate stupid ideas, because they can be very powerful in a horrible way. People said, "Well, I'm going to leave the Church of England. I'm going to go to another church." I don't know which church they were thinking about, but I'm going to go to another church, one that will support my idea that Jesus, of course, was white. And I mean, hopefully, obviously, I don't condone this way of thinking at all, but I can understand it, I think, a little bit. It's a silly idea that Jesus was white-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes, but it's everywhere. It's widely available, and for some, it will be all that they've ever known about Jesus. And I think probably the people who are commenting, it's maybe all that they've ever known. So this is how they know Jesus, which means when you challenge that, you don't just challenge the notion of the skin color of Jesus, you challenge everything. The whole belief system is built on this idea that Jesus, of course, is this white guy. And then when you take that out, you pull the rug out and you challenge absolutely everything that has come since. And it doesn't matter who you are. That is a deeply unsettling experience. So as I say, I do not condone it, but I can start to understand why they'd react so angrily, because when someone pulls the rug out, when it challenges your whole belief system, I think fear is a pretty natural response. And in our fight or flight to fear, flight looks like ignorance and just saying, no, I don't want to hear it. I'm retreating. I don't want to hear. And fight looks like going on the internet and saying, well, I'm leaving the church because I don't know, way do I believe in this. It's a scary, it is a disorienting thing to have the rug pulled out from underneath you. I want to offer you this stupid analogy, which I think was maybe helpful for me. Maybe it's just ridiculous though. But I was thinking about doing a Rubik's Cube. And I don't know if you've ever done one. I've never finished one, so this might be totally wrong. So I want to be like, that's not how you do a Rubik's Cube. But when I'm doing a Rubik's Cube, I get a bunch of things in order, and I get them in the place where I think they're supposed to be. And then in order to progress, you have to mix up and you have to mess up everything you've done in order to go and get the next piece. And it feels counterintuitive. It feels like you've thrown away absolutely everything that you've worked for so far. And I suspect that is how the hateful commenters on the Archbishop of Canterbury's Instagram, I think that's probably how they feel. They feel like they're being told, no, you're gonna have to do a little bit of shuffling around, and it's gonna feel like you're gonna lose everything that has come with it. It's like they've got all these blue squares in order on one side, and then there's one just like white square on the corner which shouldn't be there. And the idea that they'd get rid of that means they're gonna have to like twist and question absolutely everything else. And there's a deep fear. What if the other blue squares don't return? What if everything I've known doesn't return? Do you know what I'm saying? It can be deeply, deeply unsettling to do that twisting work, to do the work of questioning what it is that we've believed and whether or not we've built things on untruths or built things for our own convenience. The first steps to dismantling the false gods that we build is to say yes. It's to say yes to the costly, disorientating, destabilizing journey, which is the journey of discipleship. It's a journey towards truth. You can have it easy, or you can have it true, but you can't have it both. So, that's my first example in contemporary culture. And I, as I say, I hope it's something we can agree on and say, like, that is ridiculous. Maybe it still might be challenging, but I hope we can agree on that. The second one is this idea of homemade religion. Perhaps it's about worship again. For some reason, worship, and I don't just mean singing, I mean the way that we worship God in whole, the way we organize church or organize structures of worship. For some reason, those are the easy places to make God in our own image. We see this in, do you remember the golden calf? That's so out of context, isn't it? You're like, what golden calf? Moses comes down the mountain with the Ten Commandments, and Aaron has built this golden calf, this image of God. Tim Keller says they weren't bored of God. They weren't bored like, oh, let's get a new God. What they were trying to do is build something to worship God by. But as soon as you make God into an image, as soon as you put God as just one thing, you automatically exclude all of what God isn't, all of the unspeakableness of what God is. You deny other things. So with the case of the golden calf, like, sure, a calf is strong and we need to say, like, yeah, God's really strong. But the golden calf isn't loving. And sure, like, gold is precious and we need to say, yes, it's a golden calf. God is precious just like gold. But gold isn't living. It isn't warm. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't care. So the second you make these rigid images of God, you automatically misrepresent God. We've got to be very careful in our worship, and our worship is the seat of lots of distortion. And so I'm not saying that this is where we're at, but I'd like to talk perhaps hypothetically for a minute. As you hopefully know, we did some surveys recently, and we asked you how you're doing and how you're engaging with us as a church. And one of the most common responses that we received, worded in different ways, was, when can things go back to normal? It was like, I just can't wait to be back in church. Or it was like, can we do this so it feels more like it was normal? Or, whatever it was like, this sentiment was like, I just want things to be back to normal. And for us, it's so encouraging. It's so lovely to hear that, what we were doing before coronavirus shut the world down, what we were doing is something that you loved and you enjoyed and you miss now. That, of course, is so encouraging. But at the same time, it's, I don't know what the word is. It's difficult because the answer is no, we can't. Like, we can't go back to normal yet. And so, like, I hurt with us all. Like, I want to go back to normal. It's difficult to be like, let's go back to normal. Oh wait, we can't. Like, Sure, now the government have said that we can meet together, but no singing, no tea, no coffee, no no shaking hands, no peace, only 30 people. All of these things, like, we can't go back to normal. So that's that's hard to come to terms with. And this is where I want to ask a hypothetical question, which is, what if we can never go back? What if we can never go back? And it is hypothetical. But the question is, are we ready if that were to happen? Are we ready to find new ways to express our worship of God? Are we ready? Are we committed to following God so much that we find a new way of following God? Are we committed to following God, or are we committed to our way of following God? That's challenging. As you know, I'm a priest. This is all I've known. This is all I've known, like this structure or way of doing or being. That's very challenging. What if it could never be the same? Are we committed to following God even if it doesn't look like what you ever thought it would or has? I feel like talking about the Rubik's Cube with those who think Jesus was white was like a fun thing to do. Like, come on, just shift the white square over. But all of a sudden, shifting the Rubik's Cube doesn't feel so fun. What if we have to twist and question everything we've known, reformulate it, reshape it, in order to not worship our own truth, our own idea of God, but to worship who God is, who God says he is, who God calls us to be? Shifting traditions and long-held understandings is uncomfortable. That's the whole point of the Rubik's Cube thing, right? It's uncomfortable to do that work. It's uncomfortable and destabilizing. It's not easy. And perhaps I'm being pessimistic to be like, well, what if we never go back? Obviously, we'll probably go back in some form or another, but I think we do have to accept that there will be change. And change is hard. Change is hard, but what I want to tell you is that's okay. It's okay that change is hard, because nobody who knows anything, really, ever said that it was going to be easy. It's not, and this is where I want to land on this final like bonus distortion of God. The distortion of God is that like following Christ, following Jesus is easy. It's not. That's sorry, I lost my notes here. It's not the easy way. The central theme, one of the central themes of the New Testament, and indeed of the gospel, is that we are called to die that we might find new life. We're called to face pain and grief and hurt and are hurting, and you face all of that, you choose that, and then you go through it and you are reborn, you are resurrected, you find new life. This is one of the central themes of the New Testament. It is the way of creation, I think. When you look around, when you look at the natural world, you see this death and this rebirth, you see this new life coming. It is the way of life. If you've been living at all, you'll know this. You'll know that things hurt and then you get born out of the other side. And it's the way of Christ. It is the way of Christ that we are invited to. So I say all of this as both as a warning, like things are going to get tough, but also as an invitation. Like, will you, along with me, and the way I'm feeling challenged this week, will you say yes? Will you say yes to the twisting, to the turning, to the asking questions of what it is that we have built our faith on? Will we hold our gods up and let them face scrutiny? Like, if it's God, God can take it. But are we willing to hold up the gods that we've made and face scrutiny? Are we ready to challenge the very ground on which we stand? Are we ready to do this disorientating work for the sake of truth over our truth? Are we willing to choose truth over our truth? For those thinking about saying yes, for those thinking, yeah, I think I could do this, let me encourage you. I was listening to a podcast recently with one of my favourite authors, a man called Alexander Shire, and he said this. He said, I can't promise you that this is going to be a moment without pain, but I can promise you that if you face and embrace and allow it to transform you, it will be beautiful. I can't promise you that this is going to be a moment without pain, but I can promise you it will be beautiful. Thank you, Alexander. I am with him. And I hope to see you at our 11 o'clock Zoom on Sunday to ask ourselves if, how, and when we are going to summon the courage to say yes, to hold these things up, and to follow Jesus no matter the cost. So, I hope to see you there.